Hello and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we will be going over the top 10 mistakes that new bearded dragon owners make. This video is aimed at beginners looking to get their first pet bearded dragon, and for those who want to avoid common mistakes and problems which are most commonly made. I wanted to put this video together because I've realised that a lot of people are making these simple mistakes, but also don't realise that they're actually making these mistakes. So by the end of this video, you will be able to avoid making these mistakes yourself, which is going to allow your beardie to thrive and live a happy, healthy, long life. So let's begin the video, shall we? Mistake number 1, housing a bearded dragon in a tropical environment. Honestly, you'd be surprised with how many people I get come into my shop that think that bearded dragons live in a tropical environment. Now, I bring this one up because I've had several people coming into my shop to show me pictures of their beautiful enclosures. And to be fair, they usually are stunning enclosures. I love to see how people, decorate their enclosures. But I've had a couple of people now coming in. They'll show me these pictures and I'm looking at it thinking, oh, this looks really nice. And I say to them, what's going inside the enclosure? Thinking that they're going to say like a royal python or something. But no, they turn around and they say, oh, it's for my beardie. Which obviously I am instantly a little bit shocked. And in my head, I'm a little bit confused as to how they've got this type of setup for a bearded dragon. Then when I actually look closer at the pictures, you can see a lot of the time they'll have like digital thermometers and hygrometers. And this is when I start to panic. Because a lot of the time, the temperatures are reading 27 or 30 on the hot side, which is not hot enough for a bearded dragon for a start. But then also, you've got the hygrometer, which is reading 80% humidity. I then obviously have to start going through exactly why this setup isn't suitable for a bearded dragon with them. And obviously I educate them on how to actually set it up properly for a bearded dragon. Now, a lot of the times I get quite a few people saying that they've bought it on something like Facebook Marketplace or Pre-Loved or something, and were advised by the person they were buying it from that this is how you actually keep bearded dragons. And obviously these people that are selling the second-hand setups to these people are obviously given the wrong information. But at the end of the day, it is kind of down to the person for not actually doing their research prior to buying the bearded dragon. This is what we call impulse buying. They have bought the animal without actually doing some in-depth research on how to properly care for it. And if they had done the research, obviously they would very quickly realise that bearded dragons don't live in a tropical environment, they live in an arid environment. In addition to that, they'll realise that the temperatures and humidities are completely different to a tropical environment. Now, I wanted to make sure that I included this one in the video because I have had several people now coming in thinking that they live in a tropical environment. But the main reason why I've included this is because of the humidity. Bearded dragons don't actually require much humidity. It's usually about 30 to 40% humidity. However, in most tropical environments, the humidity is usually between 60 and 80% humidity. And if you was to expose your bearded dragon to 80% humidity for a long period of time, this can result in your beardie becoming ill and also could result in a RI, which is a respiratory infection. So just make sure that you do your research prior to buying a bearded dragon and make sure that your bearded dragon enclosure is set up correctly, including their temperatures, their humidity, they've got the correct UV, substrate, and also obviously make sure it's not tropical. So now let's move on to the second mistake. Mistake number 2, having your water bowl on top of a heat mat or under a basking lamp. This one is such a common thing which I see a lot of. The conversation usually starts with the customer saying, why is my water bowl rapidly draining? And why do I have to fill it up 2 to 3 times per day? Now, first of all, you shouldn't need to refill your water bowl in your bearded dragon enclosure 2 to 3 times a day. So obviously I ask them whereabouts is their water bowl within their enclosure. They will then respond to me saying it is on top of my heat mat on the hot side of the enclosure, or they will say directly underneath my heat lamp. I've also had several people say that they've got their water bowl in the corner of the hot side of the enclosure, and these are the exact reasons why your water bowl is rapidly draining. What's actually happening is the water is actually evaporating, which in turn will increase the humidity within inside the enclosure. And again, obviously, we've just mentioned in the last point that bearded dragons don't need much humidity, so obviously you're going to want to avoid this. Now, the simple solution to this, to stop the evaporation happening and to prevent you from having to fill that water bowl up 2 to 3 times a day, is simply moving that water bowl to the cold side of the vivarium. And this will obviously stop the evaporation, but also prevent the humidity levels from creeping right up. Again, too much humidity in the enclosure is going to result in a RI, which is a respiratory infection, which obviously we want to avoid. Just make sure that you avoid this simple mistake and keep your water bowl on the cool side of your enclosure. Moving on to the third mistake. Mistake number 3. Feeding dead feeder insects. This one actually gets my blood boiling a bit. You should not be feeding dead insects to your bearded dragon. Now, this is because when an insect is actually alive, the insect will hold valuable nutrition, which is going to benefit your bearded dragon. Now, when the insect actually dies, what actually happens is the insect will lose its nutritional value, which your bearded dragon is now going to miss out on. In addition to that, bearded dragons really love to hunt their food and chase it down, as well as physically actually seeing that insect move. So therefore, if the insect is dead, there is a high chance that your bearded dragon is going to just ignore the dead insects. Also, feeding dead insects removes the exercise and stimulation for your bearded dragon, which is important for their overall health and well-being. Over time, this can lead to laziness. Your bearded dragon will stop wanting to chase food. It will only want to be hand-fed. But the main reason why this specific one concerns me is you have to consider, why did that insect actually die in the first place? The insect could have died from a parasite, and that dead insect could have attracted bacteria. So let's say that the insect died from a parasite, or they were extremely ill, which has led them to death. Then if you're to feed that dead insect to your bearded dragon, there's a good chance that you might pass this on to your bearded dragon when you feed the dead insect. Obviously, this can make your bearded dragon extremely ill as a result. Now, when I ask people, why are you feeding dead insects to your bearded dragon? They usually say to me that it's cheaper than feeding live feed. Or I've even had several people say, because I hate bugs that are alive. Now, in my opinion, if you don't like live moving insects or bugs, then maybe a bearded dragon is not the option for you. And ultimately, if you're not prepared to feed live food and instead you want to feed dead insects, you should not be a bearded dragon owner. And if it's because it's cheaper, then again, you haven't done your research properly. Because if you had done your research, you would also know that live bugs offer a lot more nutrition to your bearded dragon. Now, also, my other problem with it being cheaper is that it's kind of ironic, because in the long run, you will be spending a lot of money on vet bills, all in the name of saving a few pennies. And what you're actually doing is you're putting your bearded dragon at risk. Again, if you can't afford live bugs, maybe a bearded dragon isn't the option for you. Like I said, this is such a simple common misconception, but bearded dragons need to be fed live insects, not dead insects. Which leads me on to my next common mistake. Mistake number 4, not gut loading your live food. I get so many people come into the shop that don't understand that you're supposed to gut load your feeder insects. A lot of people will say my insects don't last long before they die after buying them from the shop. To which I then obviously ask them, what are they actually feeding to their feeder insects? And 9 out of 10 times their response is nothing. To which obviously I then have to educate them as to why you should be gut loading your feeder insects, and that this is the reason why their insects are dying so quickly. It's because they're not actually feeding them. But ultimately, how would you like to go days or weeks without no food? Now, yes, this one is kind of common sense when you actually think about it. However, feeding your live food and gut loading them isn't only just keeping them alive. It also ensures that your feeder insects are healthy, full of nutrition, and once that insect is eaten by your bearded dragon, it provides your dragon with all of those vitamins and minerals, which is essential for its overall health and well-being. So by gut loading your feeder insects, it allows you to provide all of this nutrients to your bearded dragon. Now we will actually be doing a whole separate video on gut loading your feeder insects, so keep your eyes open for that one. But like I say, this is such a common mistake that I see here time and time again. So if you're planning on getting a bearded dragon, please keep in mind that you will be feeding your feeder insects. So now let's move on to the next common mistake. Mistake number 5. Feeding too large of feeder insects and overfeeding on live food. Now, I thought I'd tie these 2 points together. So first of all, let's actually focus on feeding too large of a prey item. Now, you need to be careful that you don't feed too big of an insect to your bearded dragon. I quite frequently have to advise people on what size they should actually be feeding to their bearded dragon. Now, there are a few reasons why you need to avoid giving too big of prey items to your bearded dragon. First of all, if your prey item is too big for your bearded dragon, there's a high chance the insect will actually get stuck inside your dragon's digestive tract, which could cause impaction. In addition to it getting stuck, it will act like a roadblock, causing everything behind it to actually build up, which ultimately could cause further problems. So to avoid this beginner mistake, a good rule of thumb would be to remember that any item of prey should be smaller in size than the space between your bearded dragon's eyes, like you can see on the screen. This will help you judge the correct size which you should be feeding to your dragon. Now, moving on to the second part of this common mistake, which is regarding overfeeding on live foods, especially overfeeding on Morio worms, which is also known as superworms, or for my US viewers, on hornworms. Please try to avoid this huge beginner mistake. There are a few reasons why you would need to avoid doing this. So, reason number 1, Morio worms and hornworms have high levels of fat and can cause your dragon to become overweight or even obese. In addition to this, they are highly addictive to your bearded dragon. They're basically like drugs for them, which over time, if you only ever feed these worms to them or overfeed on live food in general, it will lead to your bearded dragon becoming fussy about eating their veg, which means that you're going to struggle to actually get them to eat their veg. I have seen way too many obese bearded dragons, all because of overfeeding on live foods, and usually it's more because they're overfeeding on Morio worms. Another concern about overfeeding on live food can lead to several health problems down the line. For example, it can lead to MBD, gout from too much protein, mouth rot from too much fats and sugars, kidney disease, which is going to be a horrible experience for you to watch your bearded dragon go through later on in life. I really can't stress enough that you really need to watch what you're actually feeding to your bearded dragon. Beardies are very good at tricking you to make you think like they're still hungry and almost starving when actually they're not. But if you keep offering more and more live foods, they will keep smashing it down. So make sure that you don't give in to this behaviour and use live food in moderation. I also can't stress enough that you really do need to ensure that you are persistent with feeding your beardies greens daily, especially from a young age. But also make sure to not make the mistake of overfeeding on live food, especially on fatty worms. Otherwise, in the long run, you're going to have an absolute unit of a bearded dragon, and he won't live a great life as an adult because he will be a huge fat lump of lard. So now let's move on to the next common mistake. Mistake number 6, feeding fruits and not feeding your greens and veg. First of all, let's actually address fruit. It is a huge misconception that bearded dragons can actually eat fruit, but in reality, you shouldn't actually be feeding them fruit. In the wild, their diet mainly consists of eating vegetation, flowers, and what they're not doing is eating fruits. fruits is not part of a bearded dragon's wild diet. Bearded dragons are attracted to bright colours, which is why in the wild they eat flowers, but flowers contain bee pollen, nectar, which is actually good for your beardie. So when you offer fruit, most of the time the fruits are brightly coloured and it will trigger your beardie to want to eat it. This is why if you offer your beardie a strawberry, let's say, or even a mango, both of them have bright colours, which obviously is going to trigger them to want to try it. And they will actually eat it, even though it isn't actually good for them. Just because they eat it doesn't actually mean that they should have it. Now, the main reason why you shouldn't feed them fruit is because most of the fruit which you buy in the shops are actually filled with high levels of sugar content compared to a piece of fruit which you would actually find in the wild. Basically, over time, us humans have made fruits more sweeter for our own pleasure. Now, because it contains such high sugar content, this will cause big problems for the bearded dragon later on in life. For example, beardies have acridont teeth, which is different to our human teeth. Bearded dragon teeth are basically serrated and they only get one set of teeth throughout their whole entire life. This is because it's their jawbone. So by feeding fruit, you are basically increasing the risk of them losing their jaw. In addition, feeding fruit can cause stomach bloating, and obviously the sugar content could lead to mouth rot. Bearded dragons don't need fruit in their diet, so personally I'd recommend you just avoid feeding fruit at all costs. Now, if you don't feed your bearded dragon their greens and veg, your beardie is actually losing out on so many valuable vitamins and minerals. In the wild, vegetation makes up 80% of their natural diet, so you should really try to ensure your bearded dragon is getting a variety of different veg into their diet in captivity. I will be making a video on how to get a fussy bearded dragon to eat their veg, because a lot of people seem to have problems trying to get them eating their veg. So obviously keep your eyes open for that video if you're having troubles yourself. So now let's move on to the next common mistake. Mistake number 7, using reptile carpet and sand mats. Avoid using these products like the plague. One of the biggest beginner mistakes is using one of these carpets as a substrate. Now, why should you avoid using one of these carpets? Well, first of all, they are extremely unhygienic. When your bearded dragon poops on it, you will very quickly realise it's an absolute pain to clean because of the way that these carpets are made. And basically what happens is their poop starts to seep into the carpet and makes the carpet extremely unhygienic. It also becomes smelly because the odour seeps into the carpet. On top of that, it just looks ridiculous. It's not actually aesthetically pleasing at all, but also it can cause physical damage to your bearded dragon because, for example, his claws might get stuck in the carpet, so just make sure to avoid these carpets. So now let's move on to the next common mistake. Mistake number 8, housing bearded dragons together. So many people believe that you can house bearded dragons together. Now, yes, when they are babies, you can keep them together, although after a few months, you will have to separate them once they get to a certain size. Once they get to a certain size, that's when I would recommend separating them if you are keeping babies together. But the main reason why I've included this as a common mistake is because once they reach sexual maturity, males will fight with one another for territory. And obviously, once they do reach sexual maturity, and if you're keeping a male with a female, they will obviously try to breed with one another. But the main reason why I've included this as a common mistake is because a lot of people come into my shop that ask me if they can keep an adult with a baby bearded dragon. This is a huge no-no. The adult will try to eat the baby bearded dragon. So please make sure to avoid this common mistake. Like I said, it's a big misconception that they can live together. They can as babies, but once they start reaching sexual maturity, you're going to want to make sure that you keep them separately on their own. In addition to this, if you are keeping adult bearded dragons together, you will get one bearded dragon that will try to be a lot more dominant than the other one. And basically, what will happen is the more dominant bearded dragon will basically hog the best UV basking areas, as well as hog the best basking spots under the heat lamp within inside the enclosure. On top of that, the more dominant one will continuously pin the other bearded dragon down to the ground to prove he is more dominant than that one. And on top of all of this, the more dominant one will try to take all of the food which is offered. So, as a result, what will happen is the one which isn't dominant will start to get very stressed out because it's not actually getting to bask properly and also not getting a chance to eat. So, once they reach sexual maturity, I would advise removing them and only keeping them on their own. Moving on to mistake number 9. Mistake number 9, not providing UVB. Now, you would be shocked at the amount of people I get come into my shop that own bearded dragons but do not provide UVB. A lot of people will come to me about problems which they are having with their beardie, and 9 out of 10 times these problems usually indicate MBD, which is metabolic bone disease. Now, once I've actually identified that it all sounds like MBD, I then ask them, when was the last time that you changed the UVB tube itself? And usually they will look at me so confused and are like, never. Or they will say, oh, I don't think I have one of those. To which I'm like, that's most likely why your bearded dragon now has MBD. I can't stress enough that you really need to make sure to provide UVB for your bearded dragon. Do not skip on this. If you can't afford the UVB lighting, you shouldn't be owning a bearded dragon. End of, really. Now, why is it so important to provide UVB to your dragon? Well, UVB is part of the natural vitamin D3 cycle, and it helps your dragon produce D3, which is essential for absorbing calcium into its gut. Without proper UV exposure, your bearded dragon can develop MBD. As a result, it will also have a negative impact on your bearded dragon's overall mental health. Your bearded dragon will also experience weak bones and muscles, and you'll probably notice that your beardie will be quite lethargic, as well as lead to other deformities. So please do not skip on UV. It is such an essential, important part for your bearded dragon's overall health and well-being. This is a huge beginner mistake which I see time and time again. Now, you will need to keep in mind to replace the UVB tube once every 8 to 12 months. Just please make sure that you do provide UVB for your bearded dragon. So now let's move on to the final beginner mistake. Number 10, not providing an adequate temperature gradient. Finally, the last biggest beginner mistake that I see new keepers making would be not providing an adequate heating temperature gradient for their bearded dragons. This mistake of not creating and providing a proper temperature gradient, especially if the enclosure isn't hot enough, will prevent your bearded dragon from being able to digest properly. Beardies need the heat in order to digest their food properly and also regulate their bodies. I've had several people who own bearded dragons that come into my shop and say to me, my enclosure is too hot, and I ask them what their temperatures are actually reading on the basking side, and they're like, it won't drop below 27 degrees Celsius. I'm like, if anything, your enclosure isn't hot enough. To which they seem a bit confused. I then have to educate them on what the temperature should be, and they just have no idea that it was supposed to actually be hotter for the basking area. Now, this is most likely because they haven't done their research properly, or maybe they impulse bought the animal prior to actually educating themselves on how to properly keep them. But ultimately, the poor bearded dragon has gone several months without sufficient heating, and they have likely become rather lethargic, not being able to digest properly. You need to ensure you have your setup all in correct working condition with the correct temperatures, humidities, etc. prior to actually buying the animal. And also, before you buy your bearded dragon, you should be doing a vast amount of research in order to care for the bearded dragon properly. You should refrain from impulse buying any kind of animal anyway. Most reptile shops will actually do checks on setups and also quiz you to ensure you do actually know what you're doing prior to actually selling you the animal. But I find that it usually is people who have brought from a private breeder that get given the wrong education. So there we go, guys. That was my top 10 new bearded dragon owner mistakes, which I commonly see the most of. Hopefully, if you're looking into getting a bearded dragon, you will be able to avoid all of these common mistakes, and hopefully you will be able to provide an outstanding care for your bearded dragon. If you are looking into keeping bearded dragons, I'd strongly recommend watching our complete bearded dragon care video, which goes into extreme depths on actually how to care for them. I will leave a link in my description to this video. Now, I will quickly mention that if you have been keeping bearded dragons for a while and you've realised that you are actually making a few of these mistakes, please don't beat yourself up over it. I too have made several of these mistakes in the past. We all make mistakes, but the main thing is that you will now be able to avoid making these mistakes going forward. Everything is a learning curve, and the fact that you are still watching this video shows you truly care about expanding on your knowledge and also trying to learn more about how to keep them properly. But like I say, please don't beat yourself up if you have been making any of these mistakes. Just see it as an opportunity to learn and grow as a keeper. So there we go, guys. If you have any questions regarding anything from within this video, please feel free to drop us a comment and I will make sure to get back to you as quickly as I can. If you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping us a like to let me know that you enjoyed this video. If you found this video educational and you learned something from this video, maybe consider subscribing to the channel, especially if you're interested in learning more about reptiles. But don't forget to hit the notification bell. We are currently on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers. So by subscribing to our channel, you play a huge part in our channel growing. But on top of that, you also become a valuable member of our reptile community, which is filled with reptile enthusiasts like yourself. But there we go, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video and I hope that you learned something from it. Thanks for watching, and I suppose I shall see you in my next video. See ya!